And that's why we're doing this
that's why we're doing
podcast,
this,
so like everyone can,
So-
listen and know what to do.
Yeah, if you're having that break, you don't know what to do. So I can say podcast is one of my favorite pieces of content to produce, mainly because it's spontaneous, it's mostly unscripted, and you get to hear crazy and insightful stories from your guests, which I genuinely have a good time. We genuinely have a good time. Hopefully it's the same for our guests. But yeah, wait, so rude of me to not welcome y'all. Hey guys, welcome to the channel, Elton here. So if you guys didn't know, I've been running a podcast called Mic'd Up Podcast for around 2 years now. It hasn't been always smooth sailing because, well, we started off as a pet project, then we had our classes. We went from the face-to-face interview to online Zoom interviews during the pandemic. And also now we're transitioning from university to work. Surprisingly, we're still going strong. And after 20 episodes later, we're going to share with you, just for beginners, how do you actually start a podcast and how do you just keep it going even through all these things. But before we get into that, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button. It will totally make my day. Helps me produce more kinds of videos like this. And yeah, so hit the like and sub. Alright, so I'm going to share with you guys a very, very simple beginner's guide on how to produce a podcast episode. You don't need no fancy gear. You don't need cameras like this or mics, which are Rode mics or very expensive mics like the podcasters do. All you need is really just your laptop, a Zoom account probably. Everyone has a phone, so you can actually shoot a whole podcast episode on your phone, and voila, you have a podcast episode. And for mics, you probably don't even need a very expensive mic. What I use for my Zoom interviews is this mic from the Apple earphones, not like the one that comes out from the box. And I didn't even get it from the box. I got it from Shopee it was pretty cheap. And you can actually hear the quality. It's not that bad. Actually, I want to... You always ask them... just now you say you always ask them a question. Mm-hmm. What is the question? I'm going to ask this question back to you. You get a chance to answer your question on my podcast. So it proves that you don't really have to spend so much if you want to start off creating a podcast. But yeah, that's pretty much on the gear side. Regards to planning, it's a very standard production timeline. You have your planning, your production, which you just shoot, and then after that is your post-production. Because we have 4 people in our team, we generally split the work around. But yeah, let's get into it. First thing, the planning part. Alright, so for the planning stage, the first thing that we do is we have a Notion page where all of us, we just dump all the ideas in. What themes do you want to have? What topics do you want to talk about? We put all there, then we have a meeting to just like narrow it down to the theme for this month is mental health, and we're talking about certain topics. And that's part 1 of the planning. Next, we actually go and see whether we want to have a professional's opinion on it, or are we just going to discuss about it with friends with different perspectives. So it's mainly we narrow down the topics and then we move into 2 kinds, professionals or not. For the most part of the last 2 years, we've been engaging a lot of friends and friends who are professionals. So this year, our goal is actually to step out of our friend circle and get someone else, a different perspective from our different friend circles, to come and actually share their story, share their opinion, and also to engage more professionals. That's one of our goals, so that we can produce a more educational podcast for you guys for more value. So yeah, if you have any stories or if you're a professional who want to share on something, our podcast is always open for collaboration. So do hit us up in the comments or just drop a DM at Mic'd Up Podcast, and we will respond to you and we'll schedule something in the future. Yeah. Alright, so on shooting day, you gotta just relax, right? Regardless of doing a face-to-face physical interview or a Zoom interview, there's no one tip that's gonna say that do this and you have a perfect podcast. But you gotta just relax and let the podcast flow just guide you through the whole interview. What we have learned, especially if you look at our first few videos, is we try to ask all the questions that we want, and it sometimes comes off as forced. But after 20 videos or so, we sort of got the flow and went to ease in the questions. And it comes with experience, just doing more of the podcast, more of the interviews, it helps. So number 1, just relax and let the flow guide you. Number 2 is your attire, especially your pants. You gotta be comfortable in whatever you're wearing, because you're gonna be sitting on a chair for 30 minutes at least. And you don't wanna be seen squirming around in the chair, because 1, it's a bad look for you. And your guest's gonna look at you funny like, what the hell is this guy doing? It makes the whole thing very, very uncomfortable for you and the guests. That brings us to the sponsor segment for today, which is by Bottomslab. I'm saying this because I absolutely love Bottomslab. Like, it's my go-to pants almost every day if I can. I wear it like 4 days out of 7. Why I like them? Mainly because it looks good and it's super comfortable. Like it, you know, pants, like it rides up if you sit too long. Bottomslab's pants doesn't. So every single podcast, if you ask my girlfriend or my podcast team, they will say I wear that. It's like my lucky charm or so. But yes, enough about Bottomslab. You got to try them out to know how good it is. So yeah, try them out, check them out, Bottomslab. Back to the video. Okay, so a good podcast, what I would say a good podcast is not one where all your questions are answered, because that's going to be just like an exam, you know, question, answer, no one likes that. All right, what we want is something like a cafe or mamak talk where you just chill in, you're getting your stories from your friends.
I was at IKEA with my mom,
Right.
and she was just going on about like, hey, TikTok is bad for you, it's taking you away from your studies, it's taking too much time.
Look where that ended up, huh?
Yeah. I just wanted to show her that it's really easy to make a TikTok, so I was like, look mom, I'll film myself getting ice cream, and by tomorrow it'll have 500 views. And yeah, over 24 hours it got 13 million views.
Oh my god.
You're hearing about, oh, this happened, what's your thought on it, that kind of thing. So our motto is inspiring action through stories, and you can't tell a story when you're just mainly answering all the questions. So that's the motto and why we do our podcast. And the next thing is really experience, like I mentioned, experience. All the OGs would know how bad we were back then. So grateful you guys to come onto our podcast back then. So we like to have you guys on if you can in the future, but experience really, really helps. And the last thing is, please check your equipment when you're shooting a podcast. There has been many times where we forgot to change the focus of the lens. We got a whole podcast in blur. We didn't turn on the mic, which then we didn't have audio for the whole podcast. And the greatest achievement of all from Elton is he didn't press the record button, so we didn't have a podcast at all. So we had to reshoot that podcast. So please check your equipment before you shoot your podcast, before you roll. Make sure everything is fine and you have a good podcast. So now moving on to post-production. Alright, so now we wrapped up our shoot. This is, I think, the heaviest part of creating a podcast, which is the post-production. So I'm just going to read through some of the things so I don't miss out anything that I want to let you guys know. So first thing we do is we edit the main episode, which is done by Pei. She'll do the whole episode once, see for any errors, and that's the main episode. Then after that, we're going to have the timestamps, which will be done by Shun, me, or Del. We see which part is talking about which topic, and through that, the second viewing, we also check for any errors, and also coming out with shorts, 1 to 5 minute shorts of important segments of the podcast. And then next is creating the cover art, which is done by our two beautiful creatives, Michelle and Del. Sounds about the same, right? But they are two phenomenal creatives. Great in graphic design, you can check them out. But I'm not allowed to touch any of the creatives because I suck at that. So they will do the graphics for that and I'll just do the posting, which comes to the last point, which is scheduling your posts and when to post them out. That is done by me. And if you're asking first, how do you upload a podcast? How do you create a podcast on YouTube or Spotify, that kind of thing? YouTube, very simple. Create a YouTube account, drag and drop, boom, you have a podcast. For Spotify, however, you gotta go through, I think, some RSS feed or whatever, but we don't do that. A simpler way would actually be using Anchor, which is what we use. Anchor helps you to distribute your podcast to different platforms, so it distributes to a lot more. But what I know is Apple Podcasts and Spotify, it distributes there. Very simple to drag and drop. It's similar to uploading to YouTube, and that's pretty much how you get your audio up and video up onto the podcasting platforms. For social media, however, if you're asking how many content do you post up for every video, depends, all right? But what can I say is you don't have to spam a lot of content. I know out there they're saying that you have to post more to gain attention. You can post on all different platforms, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, TikTok, to get the attention. But as a beginner, I don't see it that way. If you're really trying to learn, post on one platform. We start off on Instagram also, because that's what we use most. Then we slowly learn, we build a community there, how to use Instagram, how to create traction on Instagram. Then only recently we're moving to Facebook and LinkedIn because our content is getting more educational. So don't feel the need to blast out on all 5,000 platforms at the same time. Focus on one. Once you get good, you create a community there, then you move on to the next one. If your content is good, people will eventually go watch your things, all right? So that's pretty much it about producing and posting our podcast. I just want to remind you, podcasting, sometimes it might be tempting to make it all about yourself, especially when you're talking. But it's all about the guests. It's all about their stories. Unless the podcast is named the Elton Podcast or the You Podcast, that's totally different. But most of the times, it's about your guests. So keep in mind about that. Don't cut in and don't overpower your guests, and you should be fine. All right, so that's all for this video. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you want to collaborate or anything, do drop a comment or DM us at Mic'd Up Podcast. Like and subscribe, and thank you very much. I'll see you guys in the next video. Ciao. Okay, so next next. Oh, I literally forgot to press the audio recording for the previous one. You can actually see this. I didn't record the audio for this video.